Today we'll be hosting Dr. Artal on medical ethics, lessons from the past. My name is Natalie Bodner, and I am the president of the BRI chapter at Rosalind Franklin University. And just for some background on our chapter, the Benjamin Rush Institute serves as a platform for the free exchange of ideas concerning healthcare and the practice of medicine. BRI is an apolitical organization proud to offer a free market healthcare viewpoint, emphasizing that medicine needs innovation. The Institute does not offer answers to policy questions, but rather encourages their pursuit. Here at BRI, we believe that we can be better stewards of health freedom and meet healthcare challenges head-on by gaining a better understanding of free market economics. We do have an exciting healthcare workshop planned for January 5th that's in partnership with Concordia University and the BRI chapter at the Medical College of Wisconsin. You won't want to miss it, so please stay tuned for more details. And if this is the first time you're joining us and are interested in getting involved, please direct message me privately. Towards the end of the talk, we'll be posting a very brief attendance survey, and after you fill it out, you'll be placed into a raffle for one of two $25 Amazon gift cards. You could also land a leadership opportunity in our group if you fill out the survey. And so today's Truth and Liberty lecture series recognizes that every physician is also a patient and that every patient's voice deserves to be heard. We believe that hearing medical stories, especially those of both patients and physicians during the rise of totalitarianism, is necessary to preserving health freedom. We believe that removing a free market approach to healthcare removes fundamental liberties inherent to life. And so today, as I mentioned, it is our first event in this series, and we have the privilege of hearing Dr. Raul Artal Mittelmark speak on a topic that is central to ethical medical practice, the origin of informed consent. Now, Dr. Artal will introduce us to the Nuremberg trials and share how medical providers even collaborated with the Third Reich to murder millions. And thankfully, there will also be time for a Q&A session. So please, if you could hold your questions till the end. Now, it's with great honor to introduce to you Dr. Raul Artal. Dr. Artal is Professor Emeritus and past chairman of the OBGYN Department and Women's Health at St. Louis University. He studied medicine in Italy, completed his OBGYN residency in both Tel Aviv University and Case Western Reserve University, then finished his fellowship in maternal fetal medicine at UCLA. Amongst numerous awards, achievements, and certifications, Dr. Artal received the National Faculty Award for Excellence in Residency Education in 1999. And in 2010, he was designated as the healthcare hero by the St. Louis Business Journal. He is currently a fellow in the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the American College of Sports Medicine. During his time in academia, he worked on medical commission for the International Olympic Committee, served as past editor for clinical updates in women's healthcare, served on numerous international scientific committees, and also authored 3 books, 6 educational videotapes, and over 200 publications. And as a Holocaust survivor, he currently lectures in Holocaust-related topics, including medical ethics. And it is a great privilege to hear him today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Artal.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and honor to join again your organization annual meeting. Last time I met your colleagues was in Ohio at the meeting at that time, chaired by Dean Steve Gaby, who was one of my colleagues at USC in Los Angeles. So thank you again for the invitation. I would like to open up my comments with a quote from Benjamin Rush in 1811, when Dr. Rush, one of the signatories of the Constitution, one of the physicians that signed the Constitution, stated that medicine without principles is a degrading occupation, but directed by principles, it imparts the highest elevation to intellectual and moral character of man. Medical ethics has evolved over the years, and for generations, the physicians have taken the Hippocrates Hippocrates oath. I don't know if, can you see it?
Yes, we can see perfectly.
I'm sorry. For a moment, it disappeared here. And the Hippocrates oath, I swear by Apollo, physician, by Asclepius, by health, by Panacea, and by all gods and goddesses, making them my witnesses, that I will carry out according to my ability and judgment this oath. Well, this oath was taken for generations, for centuries. However, not always. By 1944, 50% of all physicians in Nazi Germany did not take the Hippocratic oath, but swore allegiance to the Nazi Reich and to the protection of Aryan blood. This painting kind of reflects on the Holocaust period when the physicians, the Nazi physicians, were doing experiments without any regard to human life. It's important to point out that the most infamous experiments were at Dachau and not Auschwitz, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Dr. Mengele, little experiments on twins at Auschwitz, simulated gunshot experiments on women at Ravensbrück. During the Nazi era, there was an order by Goering that prohibited experimentation on animals, but not on humans. The painting that you have just seen is linked to Rembrandt's famous portrait of Amsterdam's Surgeons Guild, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp. Nurses also take a pledge. It's called the Florence Nightingale Pledge. I will abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous and will not take or knowingly administer any harmful drug. Also, with loyalty, will I endeavor to aid the physician in his work and devote myself to the welfare of those committed to my care. But as I will share with you, they did not follow their pledge. They did not follow the pledge taken by physicians for centuries. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm, no maleficence. This pledge was totally ignored during the Nazi time. A little bit about the history and historical milestones. 1859, Darwin, the author of The Origin of Species, proposes natural selection or biological determinism. Galton, his cousin, was the first one to coin the term eugenics, the study of improving the qualities of human species. In 1889, Nietzsche declares God is dead and his twilight of the gods. And in his words, the sick man is a parasite of the society, and for certain conditions it is indecent to live longer or reproduce. Eugenics movement was very popular around the world. It was very popular in our country here in the United States, particularly in the early 30s. Eugenics was taught at all the major universities. at Columbia, Brown, Northwestern University, Harvard University, Cornell, and the University of Wisconsin. To my best of knowledge, rarely mentioned at any of these universities what was told and taught in the 30s at their universities. Eugenics was very popular. Actually, the Third International Eugenics Congress was held in New York City, and this was their poster. Eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. Like a tree, it draws materials from many sources. Psychology, genetics, anthropology, family, and applied eugenics, and so on. However, a few important historical facts about the absence, I emphasize, of informed consent, the one that each of us sign in a medical office or whenever we have a medical procedure. In 1897, Michigan was the first state to introduce compulsory sterilization. In 1927, the Supreme Court gave permission for compulsory sterilization of those that are declared unfit. Then between 32 and 72, for many years, the Tuskegee infamous syphilis experiments. In 63 to 73, irradiation experiments at the University of Washington, all of them without an informed consent. It's important to point out a fact that is not generally known, that United States continued to sterilize the unfit, quote unquote, until 1981. The state of Oregon was the last one to abandon compulsory sterilization of the so-called unfit. However, 70,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized for eugenic reasons. Where did it all originate? It originated in Germany with Eugene Fischer, the director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, Anthropology, Eugenics, and Human Hereditary, the star model for Hitler. In 1895, prior to Eugene Fischer, Dr. Alfred Pletz, a physician and eugenicist, continued to term racial hygiene. And in 1933, he wrote, Hitler would bring racial hygiene into the mainstream. And indeed, Hitler was greatly influenced by racial hygienists and includes the eugenic racist theories in his infamous book, Mein Kampf. In 1933, Hitler's and the Nazi enacted the first Sterilization Act, the law for the prevention of hereditary diseased offspring. These posters appeared everywhere in Germany. It was unanimously accepted that Hitler was the Dr. Hitler, like the Surgeon General. He became the people's physician, and his principles were followed with the infamous 3 Nuremberg laws, which were passed in 1935. The Reich Citizenship Law, the law for the protection of the German blood and German honor, the law for the protection of the genetic health of the German people. Nazi sterilization law were implemented in 1933 for those that were determined to have genetically determined illnesses, mental deficiency, deafness or blindness, epilepsy, severe alcoholism, Huntington disease, schizophrenia, and severe malformation. Jewish being Jewish was considered to be an incurable disease, and the Jewish people had to be eliminated. Then the Germans published the Nuremberg Law for the protection of the German blood and German honor. And these tables indicating those that had Jewish heredity were distributed to all the healthcare providers in Germany and in the German allied countries. Physicians were equipped with this expert anthropological equipment to practice the science of race. They will measure the length of the nose and do all kinds of other non-scientific measurements. In Germany, during the Third Reich, more than 2,000 physicians joined the Nazi Physician League 4 years before Hitler became chancellor. So the Nazi physicians' philosophy preceded Hitler. 38,000 physicians, 50% of all the physicians, voluntarily joined the Nazi Party by the end of World War II. It was estimated that up to 35% of nurses joined the Nazi Party. 7% of all physicians were members of the SS, compared with 0.5% in the general population. The German physicians, nurses, other medical personnel participated willingly in the euthanasia program and coerced research to eliminate those that they considered not to be worth to stay alive. And this is a Red Cross nurses gathering in Berlin for a swearing ceremony into the Nazi Party. And here you can see the nurses taking the Nazi swearing ceremony. After the ceremony, being congratulated by Hitler. Many of the nurses were in the leadership of the Nazi Party, here with Nazi physicians at a Nazi gathering in Berlin. This is a famous poster at the German Hygiene Museum in 1940, where Nazi Germans considered themselves as being the master race. And here the poster of the master race. German women were encouraged to reproduce and increase the size of the master race. 3 roles were assumed by nurses and midwives prior to World War II. Motherliness, racial engineering, Lebensborn, and nurses were instructed at time of deliveries to select racially worthy orphans for adoption, born actually from Aryan women in a relationship with SS members, children that became orphans. And those that had Nordic features, in other words, blonde hair and blue eyes, were allowed to survive. However, those that didn't were killed. And the German-occupied countries' babies with Nordic features were kidnapped from their parents and adopted by German SS families. It was estimated at the time that up to 100 were kidnapped. Here are Polish babies chosen for their Aryan features, blonde hair, blue eyes. Before they were given up for abortion, nurses will expose these babies to sunlight to lighten the color of their hair. Here are children on the way to adoption. This poster appeared everywhere. Jews were depicted as monkey, and under the posters was written in German, You are sharing the load. Genetically ill individuals like the Jews cost us approximately 50,000 Reichmarks fortune by the age of 60. So they had to be eliminated. From the beginning of 1933, midwives were included in the practice of racial engineering. Racial engineering. Most deliveries at that time were done at home. Midwives were required to report hereditary diseases, malformed newborns, small children, children of forced or slave laborers, and midwives were required to participate in the euthanasia program and to perform abortion on slave workers. In 1939, the Secret Reich Committee for the Hereditary Health was renamed to the Reich Committee for the Scientific Registering of Serious Hereditary and Congenital Illnesses. Doctors, nurses, and midwives were given a monetary incentive of 28 Reichmarks, which was quite a lot, for the obligatory reporting of children with mental retardation, Down syndrome, microcephaly, hydrocephaly, physical deformities, spastic paralysis, and Jews. Being Jewish was considered a malformation. In 1939, Hitler gave this order to Leader Bowler and to Dr. Karl Brandt. Dr. Karl Brandt was his escort physician. And these were the directives given by Hitler. Reich Bowler and Dr. Brandt are charged with the responsibility to extend the powers of specific doctors in such a way that after the most careful assessment of their condition, those suffering from illnesses deemed to be incurable may be granted a mercy death. Hitler, 1939. This is Karl Adolf Brandt. Hitler escort physician. At Nuremberg trials, he was condemned to death, found personally responsible for the killing of 90,000 people. He planned and participated in medical experiments, in mass murders of prisoners and civilians, and in the euthanasia program. 28 institutions were rapidly equipped and with extermination facilities, including some of the oldest and most highly respected hospitals and castles. Methods of killing included injections of morphine, gassing, cyanide. They were first performed on children of German citizens, only later on Jews, which was considered an incurable disease. Poisons were administered slowly so the cause of death could be disguised. Children were often slowly starved or left without heat until they froze to death. So they died of so-called natural causes. These are the places where the Germans had euthanasia centers. I visited some of these places. It's chilling to go through them. Nurses' participation in the euthanasia programs at killing centers, the so-called patients were met by a male or female nurse. They were examined, photographed, measured. Then they were sent to gas chambers, which were disguised as shower rooms. The nurses told them that they would be bathed. Most patients accepted the nurses' explanation they were going to take a shower. But sadly, they were all gassed and later on cremated. Parents were informed by a standardized letter used at all institutions that their child has died suddenly and unexpectedly of brain edema, appendicitis, or other fabricated causes. The bodies had to be cremated immediately. On July 14-1, all doctors, nurses, and medical personnel were ordered to register not just infants, but all minors known to have crippling handicaps. Anyone failing to register such individuals could be fined up to 150 Reichmarks, which was fortunate at that time, and also face imprisonment for up to 4 weeks. This is one of the euthanasia centers. It's a photograph that I have taken of the Hartheim Euthanasia Center. On the outside, all these castles look beautiful. You walk through the corridors of the castle and see those little rooms where hundreds and thousands of children were murdered. It's quite horrific. This is the Hadamar Castle, and this is a photograph taken for the Nuremberg trials as a trial exhibit. At Hadamar, Irmgard Huber was the chief nurse. You see this photograph of this nurse, you will think that she's an angel. She was an angel of death. She supervised the killing of thousands of children. Hard to believe. Here are the nurses and midwife that participated in euthanasia programs. They look quite innocent, but every single one of them was basically a criminal responsible for the murder of thousands of children. The euthanasia programs where nurses and midwives were active participants had phases. Initially, 70,000 German citizens, not Jews, were euthanized by nurses at these facilities. Most of the nurses did not see any wrong in their actions. Many of the nurses rationalized that they were releasing patients from suffering or just following doctors' orders, which could not be challenged. Many of the nurses were never punished, with the exception of few at the nurses' Munich trial, the equivalent of the Nuremberg trials in 1965. Only 14 nurses were prosecuted. It has been well documented that a number of nurses were reluctant to work at these centers and requested transfer to regular hospital. No consequences, so therefore they had a choice. Public pressure forced Hitler to close the euthanasia programs in the spring of 1941. From euthanasia, there was a quick transition to the final solution. All Jewish people were condemned because they had bad genes. So 6 million Jews ultimately were killed at the 44,000 concentration and extermination camps in Europe because they had bad genes. Ironically, this is a more recent study done in 2017. It shows that Ashkenazi Jews that were all condemned to death by Nazi Germany actually have less. I lost you here for a second.
Do you have your PowerPoint slides on the bottom somewhere? So quite all right. Yep, Microsoft PowerPoint. There we go.
I'm sorry, that the Ashkenazi Jews actually have less single gene disorders than Northern Europeans. You can see on this table, but that's beside the point. From euthanasia centers to concentration camps, the new killing enterprise was designated as the special treatment 14F13, which was the term given by SS, Nazi German police, to the file number used by the Inspectorate for the Killing and Prisoners in T4 centers. Here are the, as I indicated before, the 44, only a few of these centers on the map, the more notorious centers, but there were 44,000 concentration extermination camps all over Europe. I myself was born in a Nazi concentration camp right here in Transnistria, in a place called Bershat, Transnistria. I was born in hiding. My parents were interned in a concentration camp, and I was born in hiding and kept there for close to a year. Believe it or not, something that is not commonly known is that Nazi Germany had a hard time identifying the Jewish people. So guess who came to their assistance? IBM. IBM invented the first computer, and some of you may have seen those computers that had the punch cards. And they were initially invented for one purpose and one purpose only, to determine who was Jewish and had to be exterminated. Physicians and nurses had a central role in the final solution. They were involved in the ramp selection where the inmates or the Jews arrived, accompany patients and Red Cross cars to crematoria, choose the appropriate number of pellets of gas to be used to kill them, observe through a hole how the victims were dying. When the victims were dead, orders were given to open the gas chambers, sign the form confirming that the victims were dead, observe the extraction of teeth to recover gold, obtain pathological specimens. The Nazi German doctors believed that the Jews had inferior brains, and assist in medical experiments. Medical experiments were done initially with a primary objective: to test extreme conditions to benefit the Nazi Germany army. Hypothermia experiments were done at Dachau in 1942 by Dr. Rascher and assisted by Kiel professor by the University of Kiel and professor and nurses. Data on hypothermia survivors actually were presented at the annual meeting of the Air Force, Nazi Germany, Luftwaffe Air Force Medical Service in Nuremberg. 95 physicians were in attendance at that time. Here is Dr. Rascher with a nurse assistant freezing to death a victim to see how long could actually pilots survive in freezing water if they ever were shut down. Here, a deadly altitude decompression chamber by Dr. Sigmund Rascher and nurses. Horrible experiments. Here, the horrible experiments conducted on Roma gypsies at Dachau, where victims were infused with seawater to see how long it will take to die under these conditions. At Ravensburg, an exclusive camp for women, some of the most horrific experiments were Dr. Gebhardt and Oberhäuser, with the assistance of nurse Kurtnheim, infected wounds to test antibiotics. Later on, they will amputate the legs of these women and then try to reimplant them and see if that can be done. Here you can see amputated limbs that would be transplanted to other inmates which lost their limbs. Malaria, typhus, and typhoid-induced infection were conducted at Dachau. At Dachau, also blood coagulation experiments where the victims will be basically exsanguinated. Photograph taken at Auschwitz, I visited this place, and walking through this door, you go back a few centuries, and it's horrific to see this grotesque place where the most cruel experiments were conducted, and what Mengele described as the surgery department. And here is the infamous physician Mengele at the ramp at Auschwitz, where he selected which people would be retained for slave work and which of the victims will be used for medical experiments. Some of the most horrific experiments were conducted on twins. And they call these experiments the master race experiments, trying to create and maintain the masked race. Here are the Nazi physician Karl Klauberg, Dr. Schumann, and nurses engaging in sterilization experiments on prisoner in Block 10. Well, I don't know if we just say that Klauberg and Schumann were among the first ones to also engage in creating birth control medication. Nurses were active participants in the sterilization experiments. The purpose of the experiments was to perfect a technique in which non-Aryans could be prevented from reproducing, but still being able to work as slave workers. These are the number of victims that were used by the Nazi medical during the Nazi medical research, close to 100,000 nutritional experiments and hepatitis, anatomical, and other experiments. Here you can see on a break nurses and physicians that participated in these horrific experiments. They looked quite happy. And it didn't seem that the experiments had any adverse effect on them. And here a group photo of these very happy researchers and basically criminals. Pregnant women were interned at all the concentration camps. At Auschwitz, about 3,000 of them, pregnant women, and about 30 babies of those born at Auschwitz actually survived. There were two midwives there. One was Stanislawa Leżinska, a Polish nun, who was an absolute angel. She is a candidate for canonization by the Vatican, were at great personal risk. She refused to kill the babies when they were born. And she used to hide the babies between the mother's legs and cover them with newspaper and send the mothers to the gurneys, to the barracks at Auschwitz. The guards were generally afraid to go into the barracks because they were afraid of disease. Here you can see in the barracks mothers and their babies basically and hiding these babies in the barracks. I myself was born and hiding in a Nazi concentration camp in a place called Berchat, Transnistria. Of the 21,000 that were interned there, only about 1,900 survive, and I'm among the surviving ones. And I owe my survival to Dr. Menchel, who, despite curfew in the camp at night, he came and assisted my mother to at my delivery, which was quite a complicated delivery. I was born in a breech position, which is considered a complicated delivery. Luckily, he saved my life, he saved my mother's life, and then I was kept in hiding there for 1 year. However, sadly, close by, at a place called Vinica, the capital of that area, thousands of women, men, children, and babies were killed. At the local maternity hospital, the Einsatzkommando, which were responsible for that area, which killed 90,000 or more people in the area, came to the local hospital, maternity hospital, asked for the physicians and women that were Jewish, which were identified. They killed all of them. Then they asked for the Jewish babies. The Jewish babies were packed in sacks like unwanted kittens and thrown out on the street, into the street, and killed. Vinica was famous for another thing. Next to Vinica, the Nazi Germany army built a bunker for Hitler, from where he was supposed to direct the attack on Moscow. And as I indicated before, all the Jews in the area were killed by Nazi Germany. This photograph, which is found at many Holocaust museums, was found in the pocket of this soldier, and on the back of the photograph was written in German, "The last Jew in Vinica." At Auschwitz, there was a hero, Dr. Gisela Perl, who was also instructed to identify the Jewish mothers and to participate in the killings of the babies. But somehow she saved many of these mothers. She also saved the mothers that were in their early pregnancy by conducting abortions in secrecy, because those that were found to be pregnant women were all being killed, and the remainder of the women that were not pregnant were kept for slave work. Dr. Gisela Perl survived the Holocaust, and then she lived in New York and practiced at one of the hospitals. She was a true hero. Jewish physicians and resistance were decertified and not allowed to treat German patients. However, at personal risk, they took care of patients. Jewish midwives were banned from the profession. Ironically, Eduard Bloch was Hitler's family physician, And Hitler used to say that if every single Jew would have been like Bloch, they would have been kept alive, that he was an absolute angel. So he protected him, he didn't kill him. 300 Jewish physicians were taken from camps and sent to the Russian front to provide medical care to Nazi soldiers. Those that refused were executed. And Jewish physicians and nurses in camps risked their lives to save others, performed secret abortions like Dr. Gisela Perl, cared for the sick, and assisted with deliveries like my own deliveries. A few historical facts. More than 6 million Jews were selected and killed. 400 German patients were selected and sterilized. 5,000 German children selected and euthanized because they had some type of congenital malformation. 200,000 German adults selected and euthanized. Only 15% of all patients in German mental hospital, Germans, non-Jews, at the start of World War II survived. Cruel and murderous medical experiments were conducted on thousands of inmates and others by Nazi physicians and nurses. And these are the killer nurses of Nazi Germany at their Munich trial. Here they are. This is the head nurse of Ravensbrück, which was considered the hyena of Ravensbrück, known for her cruelty and for her criminal activities. Here is Irma Gries, the hyena of Auschwitz, a nurse and a guard at Ravensbrück, Bergen-Belsen, and Auschwitz, personally responsible for the murder of hundreds, if not thousands, of inmates at Auschwitz. And this is a Vera Salvequart, another nurse at Ravensbrück, who used to say, "What does it matter to me if we kill these people?" This is a doc of Nuremberg physician trial. And here you can see Karl Brandt, another 22 Nazi physician. Important to point out that Karl Brandt, the escort physician of Hitler, was thought to be responsible for the killing of 90,000 Jews. Nazi criminal physicians and nurses, a total of about 5,000. Of them, only about 23 physicians were tried. 7 were acquitted. 7 received, like Karl Brandt, received the death sentence. The remainder received prison to 10 years in life. Only 60 women, including 14 nurses, were tried. 21 nurses were executed. Remainder received prison. And the question came up, should Nazi medical data obtained from concentration camp victims be used? Does it have any scientific validity? Should the data be published or quoted? It was decided not to. The moral failures of physicians and nurses during Nazi regimes in Europe was that they adopted the principles of eugenics. They adopted and implemented race laws and forced sterilization. They participated in euthanasia programs. They participated in sadistic and deadly experiment without consent, and they distorted the truth. Dr. Thompson, who was a British-Canadian Air Force officer, was the first one to name medical war crimes as a special category for prosecution. and he laid the groundwork at the Nuremberg trials for the novel mandate by the judges to demand an informed consent, a fact that is known to very few, that the informed consent that we sign in the doctor's office or for any procedure originated at the Nuremberg trials at the suggestion, advice of Dr. Thompson, and adopted by the judges who declared that no procedure or medical intervention should be conducted without a consent. At the conclusion of the Nazi doctors' trials in 1947, the justice issued the Nuremberg Code, the first international code of human subject research and care with a primary concern for voluntary consent, emphasis on voluntary consent, autonomy, beneficence, do no harm, and justice. The Nuremberg Code informed consent emphasizes voluntary, well-informed understanding consent, and the medical staff must stop experiment or treatment at any point if dangerous or if the subject refuses. Why did it happen? Nazi ideology had a great deal to do with why these horrific Nazi experiments were conducted and allowed. Nazi doctors believed that they were doing a great service to their country in the name of Hitler. They were so brainwashed that they believed they were doing a good thing. By killing unwanted people, they thought they were healing German people. The healing-killing paradox allowed the doctors to feel less guilty. Sadly, this healing-killing paradox, in one form or another, still exists in some countries. The question came up, how physicians trained to become healers, become killers. The justification was the concept of life unworthy of life. Throughout history, we find that the wish to play God, racism, xenophobia, and science were periodically intertwined. Could the master race concept movement re-emerge? The potential risk is there. There are nefarious applications to the emerging science of genomics. And one of them is the CRISPR quandary. There is currently cut and paste DNA technology where one can create smarter, fitter, or more violent humans by identifying genes and modifying them. For the good of or ill, China is set to lead the way for human enhancement. It's known that they are conducting such experiments with the purpose of creating the perfect human beings. Milestones for the principle of ethical research: 47, the Nuremberg Code; 64, the Declaration of Helsinki; 75, First Revision; 79, the Belmont Report, Respect, Beneficence, Justice; 81, the Code of Federal Regulation. And believe it or not, only in 2019, the new federal policy for the protection of human subjects, the new common rule, was adopted only 3 years ago, explicitly excluding public health surveillance from human subject research and emphasizing at the beginning of the document, explanation of the purpose, risk, and benefits. Very sadly, to recognize that according to a 2013 survey, only 22 of the 140 medical schools included in their curricula, believe it or not, the origin of the informed consent, the euthanasia programs, the Nazi medical experiments, and the significance of the Holocaust. it's not known or recorded how many nursing schools included this. I would like to conclude with a quote from Elie Wiesel, whom I had the honor to know. He used to call me I was his young friend and fellow. And he used to say, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormentor. Elie Wiesel. It was a pleasure being with you, and Natalie, if we have any time, I will be happy to answer any question that you may have, and you may find some more details in these references, some of them that I'm the author and others.
Thank you, Dr. Artal, for sharing that with us, and thank you to everyone for staying until the end. Shocking lecture, but very eye-opening. Thank you for trusting us with your personal story as well. I think many of us are familiar with the horrors of World War II and of the Holocaust, but not with the history of eugenics and how it made a huge impact even on American institutions and universities. And it really brings a lot of weight to many of us who are medical students here and physicians on what it means to have informed consent in the medical community, and also the weighty words of the Hippocratic Oath, what that truly means. So thank you for enlightening us. And now if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to unmute yourself or type them in the chat. We do have an Amazon gift card raffle that's ongoing for Rosalind Franklin students. If you do not have access to that link, please could you privately message me or Luke Davis, and we'll get that to you after today's lecture. But one question that we had in the chat privately was, Dr. Artal, you described how German physicians comprised 7% of Hitler's SS, whereas less than 1% of the general population joined this military police at the height of the war. Could you describe this phenomenon?
I'm sorry, I can barely hear you. Could describe what?
Could you describe this phenomenon, why physicians were so attracted to this idea of eugenics?
Well, it's very simple. They were brainwashed. They were brainwashed from, and schools were, in a way or another, the science of eugenics were slowly adopted, were young children were educated and taught that there are inferior races around the world that do not deserve to live. And the one inferior race that had to disappear was the Jewish race. I mean, the general population was educated the concept of eliminating the Jews was adopted quite at an early age.
Yeah, thank you. And hence the reason why it's important for physicians like Dr. Thomas and nurses like Gisela Pearl to stand up for truth and to, even though they were in the minority, to fight for what was right and fight for the good of humanity. And it's dangerous also, these are ideas, but they're powerful ideas, and we can clearly see how many, as you say, were brainwashed as a result of it. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Well, I can emphasize that a similar thing is occurring currently in China, or maybe even in Russia, where physicians are being brainwashed and forced to commit horrible things and get involved in horrible experiments.
Yeah, your lecture was a good reminder. I mean, this is a history in the past, but it's not too far in the past when these atrocities occurred.
Well, it was a pleasure and an honor to join you today. And if you think of any other questions, feel free to forward them to me. I will be happy to answer by email any questions that you may have. And again, I would like to say how impressed I am with your organization and with the directions that your organization has taken. Very important. Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank you, Dr. Artal, and it's a pleasure and an honor to hear you speak and to have you join us today. We actually do still have one more question if you have time.
Sure.
Okay. The question is, how would you recommend that U.S. medical students and pre-med communities work to engage the important topics and different subjects when there's so much pushback from established healthcare institutions?
When there is what?
So much pushback from established healthcare institutions.
Well, I think an organization like your organization, Benjamin Rush, should try and attract as many as possible students. And you are basically the voice for ethics and for human rights. So I'm very impressed that you maintain a membership, and you should increase the membership in the organization.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Artal.